Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, we have a special surprise guest for 1929's Big Business.
So the guest not here yet?
Guest isn't here. No, still waiting. Yeah.
Did you want to maybe shoot a text or an email or something for the guest?
What do you mean?
Well, because they're like, I don't mind. Like, I'm not gonna get on their case. This is, big special surprise guest. I don't want to be like ungrateful, but like we do have to do the episode. So if you want to just like touch base with them, like figure out what's going on.
But how would I touch base with them?
However you touch base with them in the first place. However you got in touch with them.
What do you mean I got in touch with them?
You for the guest that you booked, you told me that this was going to have a surprise guest. I've been waiting for this. Who's the surprise? You told me there was going to be a surprise guest.
Well, I mean, yeah, every guest is a surprise to me. That's why I said we had a surprise guest. I didn't know who the guest was.
I didn't book a guest. I thought you booked. We at the last episode, I promised everybody a big surprise guest. What do you mean you didn't? So you didn't book a guest?
Well, no, I didn't book a guest. You promised a big surprise guest, and I said, "Oh, great, that's awesome. I can't wait to find out who it is."
I thought you were doing a bit. You always do this thing at the end where you're like, I don't know what's going on with the show, and then you actually know what's going on with the show, and it's like a little like, oh, what do you mean you didn't book a guest?
No, I didn't book a fucking guest. When have I ever booked a guest for the show? You're lucky you get me on an episode.
So
you didn't book a guest?
No, I didn't book a guest because I thought you booked the guest.
How would I even book? I don't. Do we have? How
do
we book
or
guests?
The phone or something? What do you mean? How do
we have an email?
Them? We have an email. Yes, we have an email for the show. That's
I've never used the goddamn email.
So we have to do this episode on Laurel and Hardy's Big Business, and we don't even have a guest. Well, that's another fine mess you've gotten us into. We are here today to talk about Laurel and Hardy's Big Business. Tom, and only Tom. Big Business. I want to get into this. I think we should probably start talking about Laurel and Hardy because I think this is a real example of, and we talked about it earlier this season with the bank dick, right? And these keep coming up. We're like, the bank dick, they're very similar for us specifically. One, insofar as like, these are both cases where you really feel like the registry was like, well, we obviously have to get a blank movie in, a W.C. Fields movie or a Laurel and Hardy movie in, rather than like, well, this one work is a definitive totemic work. The other reason I think they're similar, and I don't want to speak for you too much, but I feel like they are both people or both comedy acts that we have absorbed through cultural osmosis, right? We're both familiar with, but I don't think either one of us is like grew up with it insofar as being like deeply enmeshed in it or anything like that. Is that fair?
No, yeah, that's fair. I think Laurel and Hardy were a little more I guess on the brain at the forefront in terms of that sort of like cultural osmosis, and that I at least like know of the figures of Laurel and Hardy and like who they are and like kind of their place in cinema, comedy history and all that. But yeah, definitely really no firsthand experience with them until doing this episode, watching this short.
So that was going to be my next question. Had you ever seen anything Laurel and Hardy prior to Big Business for this show?
Unless it was so long ago that I'm forgetting. Like I'm almost like 99% positive we never saw it. I never got showed it in like in college. My father definitely never showed it to me. He was more of a Three Stooges and Abbott and Costello guy. So yeah, never really experienced these guys before. Yeah.
Yeah, like I feel like I'm in a similar boat to you. I mean, I've seen some before, but like we've seen them around, right? They are one of the most depicted figures of classic Hollywood, right? Like you've seen them in a million Looney Tunes, you've seen them in all the old Disney cartoons. You also I feel like any movie theater that had either one of those murals of great movie figures or photographs of movie figures on the walls, Laurel and Hardy are always in that mix, right?
Yeah, it was always shit like that, or like whenever you watch those like top 100 things on AMC or whatever, and maybe or you watch some sort of doc, make like behind the scenes thing on a DVD or whatever, and like fucking Joe Dante or whatever is talking about, I grew up with Laurel and Hardy, and they're great, and they inspired what Gizmo was doing, and you go, okay, great, yeah, I still haven't saw them, but thank you for the explanation there, Mr. Dante, but. Yeah, it was always ancillary stuff. It was always side stuff and just kind of, like, oh, okay, these guys, they're important. Okay, cool. And I guess it kind of gets back to the thing we talk about a lot with this show, which is also a thing that I do with the live stream stuff, which is that it's not like it was that easy to see this stuff, even if we were like had a bug up our ass to watch their stuff for most of our lives. I feel like even now it's not that fucking easy to catch any of these things on like a streaming service or whatever. And the limited accessibility, like compared to the like maybe it not being our parents' preferred comedy duo.
I think that's a big factor, because I think we had that similarly for us growing up, was that we both were Abbott and Costello households, right? We were, and I wonder how much of that, besides accessibility, is also just a timing thing, because I found out that in the 80s, of all things, Hal Roach re-edited a bunch of Laurel and Hardy shorts and features into a television program called The Laurel and Hardy Show. And I do wonder if it's one of those things where our parents in particular, like our parents' generation, was right at the point. I could be wrong with the timeline. Somebody come yell at me if I am, but we're right at the point where Laurel and Hardy's stuff was old without being vintage yet, without being reclaimed. And Abbott and Costello and the Three Stooges and even the Marx Brothers, probably a little less so, but were a little more relevant, right? Because I think,
Well, because it was something I was thinking about watching this, which is like, I really liked it. It's not like my favorite thing that's ever happened to me, but like I thought it was really funny and a lot more rowdier than I thought it would end up being. I don't know why I had the sense that they were kind of, I don't know, maybe be a little like more like polite versions of Abbott and Costello or whatever. I don't know why I had that idea, but just watching the short, I was thinking like I think it's probably the silent movie thing. Like I know Chaplin and Keaton kind of were able to overcome that, but I think there was like that they're doing different things, and then when you think about Abbott and Costello and the Three Stooges, that you're dealing with a more modern cinema in a way.
That's where it's interesting though, because Laurel and Hardy, and I think this is interesting because you mentioned this is your first Laurel and Hardy, right?
Yeah.
The majority of Laurel and Hardy's work is in the sound era. They
Okay, well
aren't
then.
really silent comics, right?
Okay. Well,
They,
yeah.
I think their first film together is like 1926 or 1927. Because the other fascinating thing about Laurel and Hardy that I was looking into is they don't start on the stage. When you think of comedy duos, like Abbott and Costello are a perfect example, right? Or the Marx Brothers, they're doing their stage shows, they're doing vaudeville, they've worked out these routines,
Yeah.
and somebody goes, "We got to get them in the pictures." Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy were both working in the stage, right? And had both transitioned into pictures. But like Stan Laurel had been working with Charlie Chaplin, and Oliver Hardy was a singer. But they were making films that they were both in. Like there's a film called Lucky Dog, which I think their first on-screen appearance. They're not sharing the screen; they're just both in the film. And slowly but surely, somebody starts to realize like these guys could work as a duo. I think their first film is a short called, I think, Putting Pants on Philip or something like that, right? And then the one that was recently inducted in the registry, Battle of the Century, which ends in this ginormous pie fight, which is so goddamn funny. But most of their work is the sound era. They are maybe the most successful transition into sound because they start so late in the silent era and because they figure out their routine. They hadn't gotten so cemented in their shtick, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And it was easy for them to transition to sound. Now, some of their shorts, like, it's some of their early sound shorts can be a little rocky, but like they end up making a feature film, Sons of the Desert, which is a very funny, wordy comedy. The thing that's interesting is how quickly you mentioned, Tom, that you were expecting them to be a more polite Abbott and Costello, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that, but I would say it is interesting that their silent stuff is very slapstick, as you mentioned, right? This film, Big Business, is the last movie that they make where the kind of tit for tat carnage gag, right? This escalation you see a lot in silent comedies where it's like, well, one person steps on a shoe, so the other person kicks his ankle, and by the end they've blown up a building, right?
Yeah.
This is the last time that is the central plot. Going forward, they start to do it becomes more character based in a way, right? It becomes a little more, I wouldn't say it's like a character study in any way, right? But like they start to lean more into what become the Laurel and Hardy archetypes. And they start to incorporate dialogue gags into this more, right? It's never going to be a who's on first style, like rat-a-tat dialogue thing. But you are able to see them, I think, honestly, because they don't start together until the late 20s. So they are figuring out their comedy personas as sound is coming in, you know. In fact, this film, Big Business, actually has an interesting place. And I was texting you this privately, but I think it's so interesting. I didn't realize this. Big Business, which is considered by some to be one of their best shorts, if not their best short. It's obviously the first Laurel and Hardy that gets into the registry, was filmed in 2 weeks, thrown together and like conceived and filmed in 2 weeks, along with another short. There were 2 shorts produced in that time period. In 2 weeks, That's My Wife is the name of the other short, by the way. That's My Wife and Big Business, 2 weeks, right before the Hal Roach studio shut down in order to install sound equipment. So if folks are watching this movie and they're trying to, get a sense of its timeline, this is literally like Indiana Jones grabbing his hat right before the door slams down in terms of the silent era. The silent era is so over at this point that Hal Roach is installing sound equipment and they're like, oh, can we get one last one in for this? Which certainly gives it a different kind of flavor.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels weird that it is a silent, it's, I mean, not to say that it needs dialogue or whatever, but it is just so like energetic and so simple that, like I said, you don't need dialogue in this thing, but like if you think about it, you wouldn't even process that it's a silent, because it is just so much about the one-upsmanship of the destruction and destroying the car and destroying the house and all that, and you just go, oh yeah, that was a good comedy short. Oh, it was a silent. Oh yeah, I guess it was. Maybe it helps that the version we watched it had a score with it, which isn't always the case with some of the silent copies we have to get of movies every now and then. But yeah, I would honestly have thought, yeah, like this sound around the time of like, well, not the time around the time of Abbott and Costello. That's like 20 years later, but like, you know, yeah, it's probably, maybe Laurel and Hardy had like one line of dialogue here or there, and then but you don't really remember it. But no,
yeah. You were saying, please. No, I don't want to.
Oh no. I mean, I was just saying, like, again, because you did more of the research as per usual, but like, it almost feels like that's probably, if I had to guess, why this is the first Laurel and Hardy to get in, which is that it does feel so like laser focused and well crafted and not overstaying its welcome, and like you said, quite literally being the last movie out the door of said studio before shifting to the sound era. So like it has this and you could speak on this more than I can, obviously, but like, is it like what other like, if you had to pick a Laurel and Hardy, like what would you have thought would have been the first before looking at this list?
I would have thought either the Music Box, which is it's a couple years later, it's their Oscar-winning short that the entire gimmick, I mean, there's more setup around it, but the entire premise, and look this up when we are done, Tom. You will have a good time. So Laurel and Hardy have to get a piano up a set of stairs that feel like the stairs from The Exorcist. They're just massive and long, and it's a nightmare. And the entire thing is just them having to get a piano up the stairs. That's
into that.
It's so goddamn funny. And in fact, we'll talk about it whenever the Music Box comes up on the show, because it is in the registry eventually. That short is why they created the Oscar category, apparently. I believe it was Hal Roach, but it could have been somebody else. Somebody involved with that short basically went to the Academy and was like, these things are hard work. You should recognize that. Anyway, but you keep saying, Tom, that I could speak to that more. You know who could speak to all of this even more is the Library of Congress. So without any further ado, here's what the National Film Registry had to say about big business.
As gifted in their repartee as they were in their physical antics, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy were the perfect team for the transition from silent film comedy to sound. Their legendary career spanned from 1921 to 1951 and included more than 100 films. This two-reeler finds the duo attempting to sell Christmas trees in sunny California. Their run-in with an unsatisfied customer, played by James Finlayson, lays the groundwork for a slapstick melee, eventually involving a dismantled car, a wrecked house, and an exploding cigar. The film was produced by the team's longtime collaborator, Hal Roach, the king of no-holds-barred comedy.
So that's what the National Film Registry had to say. Now,
okay, so first off, is that you're in for a good time when the plot revolves around door-to-door Christmas tree salesmen.
Yes.
That is
with
just
only one tree. With
they have two.
Oh, they do have a tree. You're right. But
they have a smaller tree, which
yes.
the Finlayson, whatever, or I don't know, is basically wrestling as they're tearing his house apart. Just right off the bat, you're just like, oh, door-to-door Christmas tree salesman. That's so stupid. I love this.
And the fact that they're in California, right? Some people who have written about it or made films about it claim that it's during the summertime.
Yeah.
That's not mentioned in the film. and there's no confirmation that that was intended for the film, but it's kind of just been added on to doing it in summertime. But either way, they're in California trying to sell Christmas trees. They are nevertheless in winter clothes.
Yeah.
Because they just think that will help it somehow.
I mean, it's funny, you know, not to disparage this movie, but I would have loved to have seen like Abbott and Costello have to do a short of them trying to sell Christmas trees in California, because listen, I love that these two guys, yeah, they like kind of bust each other's balls at the beginning, but the second this guy cuts their tree in half, they are immediately just on the same page. Oh, we're destroying this guy's house.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say it, because a thing I hadn't really thought of, right? And I'd seen some Laurel and Hardy. I guess I'll talk a little bit about my Laurel and Hardy familiarity, because I think, like you, Tom, I kind of absorbed them through osmosis, right? I remember seeing like the little, you know, my mom had an old friend who collected like all of these little like Hummel doll style things of like old movie stars, you know?
Yeah.
Which is why I now own one of these. It is, I don't. It's just sentimental. Like it's silly to have a grandma thing in my collection, but I have it. So you know, I knew Laurel Hardy. I actually thought that I had seen Laurel and Hardy earlier than I had. I'll explain this quickly. So Laurel and Hardy are in a film called Babes in Toyland, right? Or March of the Wooden Soldiers, however you call it, right? So I'm aware of that. And that would get played on TV at Christmas a lot, right? I wouldn't watch it per se, but like, you know full well, like that those lines, they would announce it all the time, right? You know, I feel like every household has their one, we're going to watch this movie at Christmas every year. And then all of the other ones that get run at Christmas every year had no, we're not doing that. Like, no, we're not going to watch that. Like, I'm sure you guys, you know, It's a Wonderful Life every year, but then we're like, up next, Holiday Inn. No, we don't need to do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But so, you know, Babes in Toyland. Now, the Walt Disney Company in the 60s made, or maybe it was the 50s, somewhere around there, made a Babes in Toyland movie with like Annette Funicello in the lead and everything. And it also includes the side characters clearly kind of filling the Laurel and Hardy roles, right? And one is a big portly guy, and the other is a tall, skinny, silent guy, right? And I remember them vividly because I watched that Babes in Toyland obsessively. And for far too long, I didn't know that they were different, right? Because, you know, and when I say far too long, I don't mean like, you know, I mean like when I'm young, right?
Yeah.
We did not have IMDb then. You have no way of knowing, you know?
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. Yeah.
And I think if it had been a thing where, if it was something where it was like, if that Disney movie was exactly how it was, but I found, you know, but they were like, oh, you know, the 1930s Babes in Toyland with the Marx Brothers. Well, I'd clearly know the Marx Brothers weren't in Babes in Toyland, but I don't know, for whatever reason in my kid brain, I was just like, oh, Laurel and Hardy look different in that movie. You know, they just look a little different.
You know what's also weird is that you keep saying the tall, thin one. Hardy's taller than Laurel, which is always like, which is weird to me because
they never depict them that way.
No, they don't. But also, but also just in terms of like when you think of like comedy duos and how like the chemistry works, you always think like kind of like Abbott and Costello, honestly, which is that the skinny one's the tall one and he's the mean one. And the fat one is shorter, and because he's fat and he's short, he's kind of like the lovable
goof. Just a little guy.
Which is again, like back to my point before, is that the second things are about to go south, they're immediately about to stand on business and be like, oh, so we're fucking with this guy, right? Yeah, let's go.
That's the thing I kind of I hadn't really considered until I was researching for this and reading people write about it. I guess I hadn't really thought about it. So I was trying to think about like the comedy duo, right? And the origins of that, right? So I was reading this up, you know, the origin of the comedy duo, you know, comes out of, depends on who you read. It definitely comes from the late 19th century. Whether it starts in like the British music halls or the American vaudeville scene depends on who you read, right? But the original purpose of a straight man, right, was originally just to repeat lines that the comedy guy was saying because the audience was too loud and drunk. And you still see that built into the comedies today. You don't think about it that way, but like that's sort of why you get the structure of like, you know, the as you mentioned, Tom, the little guy will be like, I didn't bring the bag. You didn't bring the bag. I left it at the house. You left it at the house, right? Like that came out of a necessity of yelling over drunks. Right?
It's the best things come from dealing with drunks.
And that's where this comes from. And then it starts to evolve from there. And they start to figure out, well, the straight man can help set up the jokes, you know, help like lob it up for the comedy guy to nail the punchline, you know. And in the vaudeville scene, you've got George Burns and Gracie Allen. You've got, you know, obviously we mentioned Abbott and Costello. A thing I hadn't considered, but it's absolutely true, is that Laurel and Hardy don't really fit into that dynamic. They're the most famous comedy duo in the world, right? Undeniably, they are the most famous comedy duo. But there isn't really a straight man. No. And I've been watching a number of their things. There isn't really. They're almost more like Ralph Cramden and
Norton.
And then Norton, yeah. Where
100%, because Hardy is cockier, but no less dumb.
Yeah.
Where Laurel has that holy shit, it is Norton and fucking and Ralph. Where it, like, especially when they see the sign that says no solicitors, like, well, it's personality goes a long way. He gets hit in the head. Where Laurel's just kind of standing there, just going like, ooh, and you're just like, fuck that. Yeah, that's literally their dynamic.
But then the contrast is later when Laurel walks up and has, I've got a business idea, right? Can I take your order for next year? When the guy goes back in, we've got a sale. He's just optimistically confident. And that carries through in other ones. There's a pair of shorts they did. So one of their earliest silent shorts is called Duck Soup, which has nothing to do with the Marx Brothers one. And then they later remade it in like 1930 with sound called Another Fine Mess.
And the premise, Duck Soup verse.
And the premise of both of them is that Laurel and Hardy are two outlaws, like on the run from the cops, right? They find out that this wealthy hunter aristocrat guy is leaving his mansion to go on a hunting trip. So they decide they're going to pose as the owners of the mansion and rent it out to someone in order to take the money and run, right? So that's the premise, and it works. But to give you an idea of their dynamic, it becomes very obvious very quickly. Okay, Laurel is going to be the butler / maid / house servant, and Hardy is going to be posing as the aristocrat, right? And I think that's what it is. It's not that there's necessarily a straight man, but they do maintain a sort of quasi sense of status, even though they're both very often playing the same social strata of person.
Yeah, it really is just a level of their, I don't know how to put it, like their self-confidence. Where again, I'm gonna keep, it's Norton and Cramden, where Ralph is so loud and boisterous and so sure of himself and is kind of a dickhead about it. Where Norton, he thinks he's smarter than he is, but he's kind of a little sweetheart. He's they're both just like opposite sides of the same dumbass coin.
Norton thinks he's smarter than he is, but he never thinks he's smarter than Ralph.
Yes,
and that's
exactly. Yeah,
that is the Laurel and Hardy of it all. Sons of the Desert's another good one. Their most acclaimed feature, which is the two of them in, like, again, Sons. They're like in an Illuminati, like Elks Club kind of like man's organization, right? And the entire premise of the film is there's a big retreat for the members of the lodge, right? And this is a feature film that they managed to make this work for. There's a big retreat for the members of the lodge. All of the Sons of the Desert are meeting up in, I think, Las Vegas or whatever. And the two of them have to come up with a reason to not travel with their wives and to not have the wives find out that they're going to this boys' night in Vegas.
I mean,
That's
we've
the
all
whole
been
film.
there.
That's the whole film. And they live next to each other. Right? They live in houses that are next to each other and attached. So you get this running bit early in we'll talk about Sons of the Desert when it comes up in the registry, but similar to the doorbell bit that we see here in Big Business, right? In Big Business, it's just ring the doorbell, guy comes to the door, something gets stuck in the door, right? Sons of the Desert decides, well, what if we just double that? What if the entire gambit is they've got two doorbells next to each other? And one of them keeps getting locked out and buzzing the other bell by mistake and getting let into the other's house. And this goes for 5 solid minutes, I would say, at the very least.
I mean, listen, I'm actually looking this up now. If like
What, Sons of the Desert?
no, just like Laurel and Hardy box sets.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
are like
There's plenty of them.
fucking yeah, the Laurel and Hardy, the definitive restorations Blu-ray from Kit Parker Films. Sure, why not?
I think that's
21
the one that
movies,
has the Battle
24
of the Century restoration.
21
just comes
movies,
directly.
24 cuts. Yeah, it was released 4 years ago. Let's see here. Yeah, there's a lot. What's music boxes in it?
Yeah, great one.
What's the one that you just said were
Battle of the
restoration?
Century. It's from 1927, I want to say.
No,
Well,
it's not in the.
They just
no,
restored
wait,
that recently.
no,
There we
oh,
go.
no. Excuse me.
There we go.
Yes, it is because they listed the feature lengths differently from the shorts.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they're. I mean, I'll say this: I did a lot of Laurel and Hardy watching ahead of this podcast, and I have not been dissatisfied once. Like there is a reason they have the reputation they have.
Sons of the Desert, Way Out West, and Battle of the Century are the feature films in this set, and then it's a bunch of shorts. Yeah.
Battle of the Century really a feature? Okay. I guess it's probably. I feel like it's one of those cheat features. I feel like it's one of those like 40.
Oh no, it's not. It's not a feature. I don't know why they listed it as a feature, but
yeah, Way Out West is their Western. I think you'll enjoy that one too. Yeah, that's a delightful time. But yeah, that was the thing that did strike me is they are the quintessential comedy duo, but they don't actually fall into that cliche, right?
Yeah, and it is just refreshing because I think I'll always be an Abbott and Costello boy. You know, those are my dudes. But I just really do love the dynamic of two shitheads that may bicker, but they're on the same side. They're always after the same thing. There's never any like. It's that thing I keep coming back to. It's that like it really is so funny, but so what makes them different that the second things go wrong, they're on the same side. Like anytime in Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, there's parts where they split off because Costello thinks, oh, there's monsters, and Abbott's like, what are you doing? There's no monsters, and they kind of just whatever. I just love that. It's just two dudes being dudes. Standing on business and immediately going, we're going to destroy this man's house because he destroyed our fucking door-to-door Christmas tree business.
Well, and it's also the thing of, I mean, again, in all the Laurel and Hardy I've seen, and there's so much, and there are far greater experts. I found whole podcasts devoted to Laurel and Hardy's career. The Boys, as they're known. They're called The Boys.
The Boys.
Yeah, they but in everything I've seen, there's also the fun element of this of like Oliver, Hardy takes the approach of like, I can and will be an absolute dick to Laurel, right? Repeatedly, oh, it's another fine mess you've gotten us into, all that kind of stuff. But I can do that.
Yeah.
Nobody else can. Like that's my buddy, that's my companion, And again, you do see that. You certainly see that in this one, right?
Yeah. I mean, I also love that the moment of like there's an escalation to it too of like they're destroying this guy's house, But once he destroys their car, they take their trench coats off and go, all right, now this is for real. You fucked with our car. Now we're going. Just we're not stopping.
I think the thing that cracks me up more is it's not even the car, it's the tree.
Yeah.
It's when he starts wrestling the tree, then it becomes, oh no.
Take the jackets off, throw them down, like, all right, let's fucking go. They start cutting down the gazebo from his fucking his I love the bit where he throws the guy takes he takes the headlight off of the car, throws it through the window, so they go, okay. They go to the door, they unscrew the light bulb. Laurel's about to throw it through the door, and Hardy goes, no, and points at the window, throw it through there. And then just wham.
My favorite is when he picks up a brick, right? Or a rock. I think it's a rock. Throws it at the chimney. And the chimney just explodes. Just
collapses. Yeah.
It doesn't just collapse. There's a burst of smoke. It just bursts.
And it's just the fact that it all just starts because they keep getting stuck in different configurations in the door. Oh, it's the tree. Oh, it's Laurel's coat. Oh, it's the tree again. Oh, so they keep having to ring this fucking guy's doorbell. And this guy is such a jerk off that he cuts their tree into 3 pieces, not 2. Cuts it at the top, cuts it at the bottom, and says, "Go fuck yourselves." And I'm also pretty sure there's a part where he's looking out through his door and he sees that they're like destroying his house. I'm pretty sure he mouths the words, "Those fuckers."
And that's that guy, by the way, James Finlayson. He pops up in a lot of those Laurel and Hardy shorts. He's one of those guys. It's similar to, I think, the more you get into like silent comedy, right? There are these classic supporting players. Very often they're guys who were comedy stars in their own right a little earlier, right? Mm-hmm. But like Harold Lloyd always had Snub Pollard in his stuff, right? There's a couple of classic Chaplin players, a couple of classic Keaton players, right?
Yeah.
Similarly here, like Finlayson's in a number of Laurel and Hardy shorts as a real, because he's just the right level of breakdown energy. He's just the right level of losing his shit at them. But I feel like, I'll say this, I feel like we focus too much on their rage. And I know this is mostly rage, but I feel like even if you are enjoying the antics of them destroying things, the thing that really locks them in as great, and I know we're skipping stuff at the beginning, but the thing that really locks them in as great is when the cop shows up. And this is stuff that continues through their entire group. And Laurel does the crying. His crying face. And then Stan starts doing the sheepish look down. And it's just like, that is the moment where you're like, well, good. Do this as many times as you want. Do this forever.
Laurel's reaction to realizing that the cop is next to him as he keeps just throwing shit into this guy's house. Like, because Hardy realizes it first when he slams the vase and on the cop's foot, and he realizes that it's a cop, and he's just like, oh fuck. And he's trying to, and Laurel's just keeps throwing shit into this guy's house, and he's just like going for it, and then he just goes, I
also like reaction. That while that's happening, at one point the cop turns back to Oliver Hardy, who looks like he's about to say something or throw something. The cop looks back at him and he's just like, oh, nope, never mind. I wasn't doing nothing. And does his little look down. Now, did you come across the anecdote about the house?
Did I? I don't think so.
Maybe. So, you know how there's bits of Hollywood lore that that often get repeated. The Munchkin hanging in the background of Wizard of Oz, shit like that, right? So there is a story about this film, and you can hear my dismissive tone because you can tell where I stand on it. Hal Roach would tell the story that the house that they rented to shoot in, right? Mm-hmm. They rented a house to shoot in and destroy, but they got the house wrong and ended up destroying a real person's home, right? That they found the wrong house and they went to the wrong house. They destroyed a real person's property, thinking it was the house they rented, right? That's a fun anecdote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oliver Hardy apparently was just like that. No, that's bullshit. I don't know what he's talking about. We have no record. No, that's absolutely not what that happened. What I find funny is when you see this written up in a number of articles, they will note like, well, there were disagreements about it. Hal Roach claimed that it was a real house. Oliver Hardy said it wasn't, but Hal Roach repeated the claim in the 80s on the Jay Leno show, or on Jay Leno's Tonight Show or whatever it was. And I think the thing that strikes me the most about that is Hal Roach lived long enough to appear on Leno.
That is weird,
right?
Also, why the fuck would he even be on Leno? What was he doing?
I think at that point they were just like, hey, it's an old comedy legend.
I mean, that's really old comedy legend. We're in the 90s now, folks.
Well, it might have been the 80s. It might have been.
Well,
it might have been. It might have been when Leno. Then? That's what I'm saying. I think it might have been. I'd have to check the dates. Might have been when Leno was guest hosting for Carson. Right.
Okay. Well, that makes more sense, but still not enough to make me happy.
No, not enough. Well, listen, some of these people, I was my family's out. We were watching the Jetsons movie recently, right? As one does, right? Right. Well, I'll disclose it on this podcast. So the Jetsons movie came out on the exact day that I was born. And I don't like thinking about my birthday, so instead I just celebrate the anniversary of the Jetsons movie every year. I'll just put that on and think about, good job, Jetsons movie. You turned 34, and that doesn't mean anything. That's not bad. That's perfectly fine. That's not old at all. And that one's fascinating because it's, Mel Blanc is in that, Peggy Singleton, actors who were old when they were doing the Jetsons show in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
And it is very jarring to hear them in this movie. Just sounding, Mel Blanc sounds so rickety in this movie that at the end, when the title card comes up and basically tells you, yeah, Mel Blanc, Mel Blanc barely made it through production. You're like, I'm not at all surprised. Peggy Singleton, Jane Jetson, lived till like 2003.
What? Really?
Yes. Yeah.
That's not okay. I mean, good for her, but I don't.
Good for her, but it's wild to think about. Yeah. No, and even in that case, like I think I was reading a book. I think Stan and Oliver is the name of the title. Stan and Ollie, one of them. A book on Laurel and Hardy, where they introduce it by explaining that one of them wrote a letter to their friends, being like, "Yes, we're very sad about President Kennedy's death." And like even the author goes out of their way to go, that doesn't make sense, right? Laurel and Hardy should not like
that's
a member of Laurel and Hardy being around. Not both of them, but one of them being around for the Kennedy assassination just doesn't make sense.
That is absolutely bizarre.
But I just want to make sure, we had to address the house anecdote. We had to. It's too much part of the lore of this short.
Listen, it's a good anecdote. I wish it was a true anecdote because then it would put it on the same level as Chuck Norris's Invasion USA, where they actually destroyed a neighborhood that was about to get destroyed. So Menachem Golan was like, hey, can we destroy this neighborhood? And they're like, yeah, sure. We're about to destroy it anyway. Great. Yeah, Chuck, go to town. Not even going to attempt a Menachem Golan impression in this day and age.
No, please do not.
No, even I'm smart enough to know. Don't do that.
No, do not. You could do a Laurel and Hardy impression if you want. More so because you haven't heard them in sound yet, so you don't know what they sound like.
Hey, I'm Laurel here, and this is Hardy. In my version, Hardy refers to himself in the third person.
One of them's English, by the way.
Not in my world. The wet brain won't allow it.
I have never been more sad that as of now, Big Business is not yet in the public domain. Because if it were, I would make you do extra work and redub Big Business with those wildly inaccurate impressions of Laurel and Hardy.
What, is that not the voices that John C. Reilly and Steve Coogan did in that biopic a few years ago? A few years ago. That could have been 15 years ago for all I know.
Well, especially because why do you think John C. Reilly would be doing the high-pitched voice? You made one of them sound like Wreck-It Ralph, and it wasn't the one John C. Reilly played.
What? You think I'm thinking here? I'm just fucking shooting from the hip, bro.
Oh, goodness gracious. But I do want to note, by the way, one of the things I was thinking about with this, while a lot of it is the destruction, right? I think one of the things that I appreciate about, especially Laurel and Hardy, because they are still forming their personas, because they aren't necessarily built around particular bits. Think about those other people we've mentioned, the Marx Brothers and Abbott and Costello, right? They are coming from vaudeville, right? They have their vaudeville routines, and it becomes a question of how do we fit this into a movie, right? And sometimes how do we build a whole movie around it? Because let's face it, if you're talking about the best Abbott and Costello movie, you're going to be talking about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately for Abbott and Costello, there is also, and you may disagree with me, you're welcome to, and unfortunately for the National Film Registry, when they're trying to pick films, there is also the element of like, oh, well, Who's on First is the greatest comedy sketch of all time. What movie is it in? One that's fine. Yeah, and they're mostly fine, right? Like, I feel like if you're and you've watched them all, so you disagree, but like, I feel like if you're talking Abbott and Costello, like, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is the one that's like pound for pound, like everything.
No, I don't disagree at all. I do
Private,
think
I think is probably second.
Maybe
best hit ratio.
Maybe, but that might be one you just put in because it was like such a culturally like huge thing at the time when it came out. I think there's like I'd have to go through my letterbox stuff because listen, they do kind of all run together. Let's be honest here. But I do think when I was going through them, there are some ones that do hit a little higher. I don't know, but I don't disagree. It's basically meets Frankenstein, and then everything else is kind of just there's bits that you're gonna like because you like the boys. And it's not you're not watching great movies.
And because they're repurposing their stage stuff. And that's the Marx Brothers too. I mean, I love the Marx Brothers, but they're repurposing their stage shows. That's why something like Duck Soup works as well as it does, right? Because that does feel at least somewhat a little more cinematic in that way. Stan and Stan Laurel Oliver Hardy, because they didn't have that background together, because they didn't have these overly worked out routines, I feel like when you're watching these films, especially Big Business is a good example, it's a little bit like a jukebox musical, right? Yeah. Where they're taking certain little routines, right? They're taking gags, right? That they know they want to do, right? Like the house destruction, like them driving the car only to turn a corner, right? Those kind of little bits, him getting bonked on the head with the hammer, that kind of stuff. Even just like the written gags, would you like to purchase a Christmas tree? Would your husband like to purchase a Christmas tree? If you had a husband, would he like a Christmas tree? All great. But it does feel like in these cases, they're just basically, how do I put it? When you go see a jukebox musical, right? One of these ones that's where they're just like, well, the songs of Huey Lewis are now in a musical. And it's like, hey, we know the songs we want to include. Now we need to write a story around them, right? It doesn't matter what they were originally about, right? We don't care. We're just going to weave the story around them. It does feel like with their films, Laurel and Hardy aren't attached to this gag that we did was part of our vaudeville show where I played an emperor and this and this and that. It's just like, no, we know the gags we want to do. So let's just pick these like 3 or 4 pop songs that we loved from the road, and let's come up with a story that strings it all together. You know,
Yeah.
Music Box is that way, Battle of the Centuries that way. Like, let's just kind of, you know, and I think that really helps. And I think that probably also helped with their transition to sound and everything, is they just were kind of going with the flow and learning the medium as they went along.
I definitely think that helps. I'm definitely probably not anytime soon because we're in the midst of the Criterion sale, and I just in 1 week bought the Godzilla -Zero 4K set, the Hitcher 4K set, and the 2 Argento things that Severin released for their halfway to summer sale. I was gonna say before I really thought about it, which is, hey, good for me. I thought about something before I said it. Did Fred Astaire ever do anything where he kind of made like, hey, I look exactly like Laurel?
You know, I wonder. I don't know, but
Because
now
I was gonna,
look.
I was gonna say, because I was gonna say it like the opposite way of, oh, did Laurel and Hardy ever do like a short where they made a joke of like, hey, Laurel looks like Fred Astaire? But then I thought like, wait, no, the math isn't right on that. Did Fred Astaire ever make a joke about it?
It
Because he
doesn't.
looks exactly like Fred Astaire.
It doesn't appear so, but so many people online, when you search this, are saying the same thing.
It's wild, right?
It is. Now, I will say, you know, I think, maybe I'm wrong, I think we did a decent job in the absence of a guest, right?
And we finally proved my thesis that we are better off without Kyle.
You know, hang on, Tom, that's interesting. That's interesting. You note that he's not here. I hadn't even noticed. I was so worried about the guest. He's not. Do you mind if I check in with him for a second?
Yeah, sure. Check
Yeah, I'm going to check in with him. Hang on. All right. I'm typing in numbers for the audio listener. There's no typing sounds anymore, so this is completely useless audio. But nevertheless, let me just give him. Okay. Yeah. Hey, Kyle. Yeah. Hey, man. Tom and I are here doing the episode, and you never showed up. Neither did our guest, so we just wanted to. What's that? It's tomorrow. Oh, it was scheduled for tomorrow. It wasn't tonight. It was tomorrow. Tom, did you know this?
Was it in an email?
Was it an email? Yeah, Tom doesn't know we have an email.
Yeah, I've never seen an email before.
He doesn't know we have an email. I don't think he knows. He might not know email, to be honest. Uh-huh.
I like pigeons.
Yeah. He says the record was for tomorrow. We just did a whole episode. Yeah. No, we didn't have a guest. We didn't book one. No, I thought Tom booked one. He thought I booked one. I don't know where we got this idea they were supposed to be. Oh, you booked the guest. He booked the guest.
He booked the guest?
The surprise guest, the really big guest. He booked the guest.
He knows you people?
Booked the guest? Well, who was the guest? Oh, that's a really good guest. Tom, he got a really good guest.
Well, you're going to have to tell me off mic.
It was remarkable. I mean, we should just, Tom, I feel like I know we just did the whole episode, but I know it's a little extra work, but should we just scrap everything we just did? Kyle's suggesting we just kind of scrap everything we just recorded and obviously go to the record tomorrow with a really big guest booked. I mean, I'm fine either way. But Tom, are you up for doing this all over again?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, whatever.
You want to do the whole thing?
We can tear the house down and do it again.
Nah. You know what? On second thought, I think this was fine. I think this was fine. Tom, you think this was fine? I think this went well.
I mean, sure. For something
Yeah,
I'm never
this
going to
was
listen to again, I thought this was good.
Yeah, this was fine. This was fine. Now, Kyle, scrap it. Scrap it. Tell him to cancel. Yeah, I'm sure they'll be pissed, but tell him to cancel. This was fine. This episode went fine.
We'll get him for
Yeah.
the Zapruder film.
Yeah, we'll get him. It'll be fine. All right, buddy. All right, thanks. Thanks. All right, he sounds pissed, but I don't know. I think that went well. I think that went well.
I think it went pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying we're not going to be able to talk to Jan Michael Vincent, but
Well, that's it
because he's
for
dead.
So, wrapping up as we always do, Tom, how do you think wrapping up as we always do, Tom, how do you think Big Business fared at the Academy Awards that year?
Well, I guess 0, since you mentioned earlier that a short they made later is when short Academy Awards were put in. So not this one.
Correct. It was not nominated for any Oscars as the short categories didn't exist yet. The Best Picture nominees that year, however, Laurel and Hardy were in a Best Picture nominee. So the Best Picture nominees that year were Alibi, The Hollywood Review of 1929, which is just shorts. It's just like a collection of skits, and Laurel and Hardy are in that. So they weren't a Best Picture nominee. But the nominees are Alibi, The Hollywood Review of 1929, In Old Arizona, The Patriot, and the winner, The Broadway Melody.
Wow, I can't believe they gave Mel Gibson an Oscar so early.
I have not. Well, here's the thing. The Patriot is the one of these nominees I didn't watch ahead of this show. Do you know why that is?
Because you have an aversion to Jason Isaacs.
Because it is lost.
Oh, well, that'll do
the only Best Picture nominee that just does not exist. There is a trailer.
Oh, no,
that's it.
I have it. It's probably in there somewhere.
I should have asked Kyle if that really big guest he has it in their archive. It's probable.
It's
a robust collection. It's remarkable. We really should have said yes and had them on the show, but whatever.
Well,
you live and you learn. This was fine.
There's like 40 years of movies we got to do. I'm sure we'll get to them at some point.
This was fine. But yes, the winner is Broadway Melody, and as Tom, privately texted you when I was working my way through all of these picture nominees from this year, boy howdy was this bad. Was this the worst crop of nominees possible? My
gotta love the Oscars, man.
Yeah. Well, it's like the second year and like everything's sound and it's very stiff. Broadway Melody, nightmare. But what wasn't a nightmare was Big Business, and what also wasn't a nightmare was us working through this guest list episode for Big Business. So the only problem is this is normally where we'd ask somebody to plug things. You know what? Let me give Kyle another call, see if that guest wants to plug things, right? It's worth a shot, right?
Yeah, why not?
I just type that in. He has blocked me.
Well, that's fair.
He's
probably playing in Elden Ring or something.
That's another fine mess I've gotten us into. You want to go throw things through his window?
Always.
All right, cool. We're going to go trash Kyle's place, but everybody else stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members like Martin Scorsese, Alfre Woodard, and Leonard Maltin, and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and us, who can submit their nominations for the registry in a form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of each episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration, on behalf of You're Missing Out. Here are today's picks.
Okay, so comedy duos, want to get something in there like that. I'm going with one that I think might seem like a probably will never happen, but you never know. Weirder things have happened with the fucking registry. There are home videos in this thing. I'm kind of just going with the slam dunk, not doing my Tom logic on this one. I'm doing Step Brothers. It's just two absolute doofuses being absolute imbeciles, thinking they're smarter than they are, but not like thinking that, like, after their initial like hesitancy to being best friends, never thinking one's smarter than the other, like we were talking about with the boys. Um, Absolute hijinks, nonstop hijinks that keep escalating. I mean, if you want to talk about a comedy of the 21st century that has just that sort of level of, we're starting at an 11 of absurdity and just constantly getting weirder and weirder and weirder, it's Step Brothers. Obviously not the same type of humor for the most part. I think some bits can get into some Laurel and Hardy territory because they're kind of just going for everything in that fucking movie. But yeah, Step Brothers I think is, God, if I might have to commit a little blasphemy here and say it's probably the best McKay Farrell movie, if I'm being honest. At least it's the one that's aged the best. And I think it's going to be the one that sort of everyone looks at as the kind of the high point of that kind of style of comedy of that era of Hollywood. Because at the time it was those guys and the Apatow Boys kind of dominating the comedy scene with their two brands. And I think Step Brothers is the one to beat in that lane that Will Ferrell and Adam McKay crafted. So I think Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly are an absolutely amazing comedy duo. Didn't even think about it, referencing the fucking movie that John C. Reilly made as Hardy. A movie that exists, by the way. No, it doesn't. Yeah, I just think it's fucking hilarious, and they're a great duo. They're probably not gonna do another thing again because of the Will Ferrell and Adam McKay's fallout, and the last thing they did was that fucking garbage Sherlock Holmes movie with Sherlock and Watson.
Holmes and Watson.
Holmes and Watson. Yes, sorry. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yeah, so we're not going to get any more from them probably. Also, especially because of the winning time thing. So, kind of for the historical thing of their comedic duoship and the kind of the high point of that era of brand of comedy, I think Step Brothers would be a good fit in terms of a Laurel and Hardy episode. So there we go.
I find that so. Before I even get into mine, I find that so. Did you feel as strongly about it when it came out, Step Brothers?
No.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I didn't like it.
Okay, good. So we're relatively on the same page because I remember it coming out. I remember I saw it in theaters.
I got a bootleg.
I saw it on a date, and we laughed at it while we were watching it, but we both kind of walked out and were like, "That was fine. Like that was okay." And it wasn't just. I think I was a date where it was like, but it was me and her, and I think my buddy came with me, and one of her friends came with us. He thought it was the funniest thing. I thought it was okay. I found it pretty juvenile. And I think it felt to me at the time when it came out, I was like, oh, this is going to be, I saw it and it's going to disappear, right? It's going to be like a lot of those Will Ferrell ones were, right? I thought it was going to be like Semi-Pro or like Blades of Glory. No, I know you like Semi-Pro, but like, you get what I'm saying? Like,
yes, it's Blades of Glory or the kicking and screaming.
Right. They kind of disappear, right? And I have just been... One of the things that sort of caught me off guard, and I'm not trying to be overly critical. I'm not trying to be like, boo, right? I'm saying it more in the sense of like, I was just surprised at the way that a movie that I kind of saw and was just like, well, I don't, I saw it, but like no one's going to talk about it in 3 years, has just permeated a part of internet culture in a way that I don't think anybody could have anticipated.
No, especially after Anchorman and Talladega Nights were so like big and a specific kind of humor that Step Brothers just completely abandoned any pretense of like narrative and just went for pure like abrasive absurdity.
And I think it's like, when Did We Just Become Best Friends became kind of like a meme. Okay, I could see that, but like I still hear about the Catalina wine mixer, and boats and hose and room for activities and like odd that has endured as it has, right?
Yeah.
Very weird. Not complaining, it's just surprising. And I also think that's interesting because to transition into where I'm at, Tom, you picked a movie that I think when we saw it, thought would be lost to time, and instead has endured. My pick kind of goes the opposite way. It's something that is truly lost to time. We were talking about comedy duos, and I started doing some research into Hal Roach and his comedy duos. And one of the things that struck me was discovering that toward the end of the the end of the silent era, there was an attempt from Hal Roach to create a female comedy duo, right? It was Anita Garvin and Marion Byron, right? They made
somewhere Jerry Lewis is screaming.
They made 3 films together. This comedy duo. They made 3 films, the last of which from 1929 is called A Pair of Tights. And it's the only one that fully survives. It is from the last year of this. So it is a female comedy duo of the silent era, which is already noteworthy. It is the only one that fully survives, which is noteworthy. It's also produced by Hal Roach and directed by Leo McCarey. So a real pedigree going at this one in the last year of the silent era. So I had to check this thing out, and I found it, and I have to say it is very funny. And it's about the trials and tribulations of basically these 2 girls. A Pair of Tights is actually referencing both these 2 girls and the men they're dating because they're all broken cheapskates. And these 2 flapper girls are really only interested in going out with these guys in the hopes of getting a free meal out of them. And the guys, when we're first introducing them, are going, are these the type of girls you have to spend money on? Nah, not really. And hijinks ensue. A lot of like
hijinks.
flapper era hijinks. And I think that the biggest frustration I had is I really enjoyed A Pair of Tights, but you find yourself, if you watch it, really depressed that this didn't continue. Now, both of these women had great careers in their own right. Look them up. They both have stacked filmographies, right? They're in small roles, but they have small roles in some very notable films. Tom, I guarantee if you clicked either of their names on Letterboxd, you've seen a couple of the films that they have done. But they are.
Let me test it out right now. Okay. What's remind me what's
Anita Garvin. Or if you just took the title, A Pair of Tights from 1929.
Pair of Tights. Let's see. Letterboxd, do your thing. 1929.
1929.
Okay. Well, because there was only one option. So who am I looking up? Anita Garvin.
Try Anita Garvin first. Click her name. See what comes up.
Okay. A lot of Laurel and Hardy stuff.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's,
Yeah. Haven't seen any of these, but.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, Anita Garvin, so like, and Topper, she's in Topper, the Cary Grant comedy.
Mary Byron. I've seen her and stuff.
Yeah. What?
Love Me Tonight.
Love Me Tonight. Oh Paradise. Yeah, she's in 2 films that we have covered on this podcast.
Yeah, look at that.
And a third that we will be doing because she's in Steamboat Bill.
Yeah, look at that.
So yeah. So again, they both had careers, but we had this for a brief moment. I think it's a fascinating curio, and I think that it's just important. It's an important work to preserve because it is the only fully existing film from this female comedy duo, directed by a comedy legend, produced by a comedy legend. It's a remarkable pedigree, and it's kind of shocking that most film fans and film historians don't know about this. So my nominee is A Pair of Tights from 1929.
Next week,
Tom Augustine joins us to talk about Ride the High Country.
fucking part is that name Bloody Sam, and that it's going to be just like spectacular violence and danger and all that. But as I get older, I think it's actually the sentimental streak that you find in a lot of his work. It doesn't get talked about a lot, but
You're Missing Out is a production of Neon Night Media. It's hosted by Mike Natale and Tom Lorenzo. The show is produced by Kaya Lampar and edited by Mike Natale and Kaya Lampar. More information about our hosts and guests are in the show notes. Thank you to Amanda Rush for our social media, and all of you for checking us out.
If you're listening right now or want to take the show on the go, every episode is available as an audio podcast. Follow You're Missing Out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave a review and a rating. It helps folks find the show.
Want to watch the show or watch some of the films along with us? Great, that's why we're doing this. Don't leave us alone out here. Check out our YouTube channel. We've got video versions of every episode, uploads of some of the National Film Registry titles we're discussing, commentary tracks, and live streams. And once a month, I'll be uploading some content that's exclusive to the YouTube channel. So be sure to click subscribe and hit that little bell to be notified as soon as new stuff goes up. Because, let's be fucking real, I ain't sticking to a goddamn schedule.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you next time.
And you'll see us next time. Because we don't watch you, you're watching us.